Hi, I'm Noam Maital, and welcome to the GovAI podcast. AI is the most powerful technology of our time, and government still figuring out how to navigate this new frontier. Join me as we explore how artificial intelligence is transforming public service, unlocking potential efficiencies, the risks that no one's talking about, and what happens when innovation moves faster than regulation. I'm thrilled to have Michael Pegues, the Chief Information Officer for the City of Aurora, Illinois, join us today. Over the past 7 years, Michael has been at the forefront of Aurora's transformation into a smart city and a regional tech hub. And beyond his work in IT, strategy, and innovation, he's passionate about digital inclusion, public safety, and driving economic growth to the city. With his global experience and commitment to empowering communities, Michael brings incredible insight into how technologies can truly make an impact. So with that, Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Noam, for actually having me.
Before we jump in, I think you have a pretty unique background as well. And I want to address that when we talk about public service and government and then how that kind of parallels and correlates with AI. But you spent some time in Morgan Stanley and in the private sector. How do you go from that role to CIO role in your hometown? And talk to me about that journey and kind of the differences, if you will, in your approach and what you've learned in that.
Absolutely, no. So, I think you even said it in your question. So, how do you go from basically a company like Morgan Stanley to a municipal government in my hometown? In fact, Aurora is my hometown. Actually, when I started working here at the city of Aurora back in June of 2017, previously I'd worked at Morgan Stanley. I spent some time over in the Budapest office, helped setting up their infrastructure and cybersecurity delivery teams. But around October of 2016, I transferred back stateside to the downtown Manhattan office, which is actually right off Wall Street. And I was basically, minding my own business, managing my teams. I had a global team. And at the time, the mayor, Alderman Richard C. Irving, who's currently the mayor, Richard C. Irving today, was running for his third try as mayor here in the city of Aurora. Him and I had grown up together. We'd known each other since we were about 4 years old. And I was just there to support him in his campaign. And, he started asking me questions about IT, about broadband, fiber optics, and just innovation in general. And he'd asked me to join his city administration. He said, wouldn't it be great to kind of give back to your hometown, to your city where you were raised in? And I thought, you know what? That's pretty cool. I've done a lot in my career, worked in, Fortune 100 companies. I worked for the Department of Defense. I think I've had a very interesting and exciting career in many different places, actually overseas, spent 20 years total working overseas, right? 10 years in Italy, 4 years in France, and 6 years in Budapest. And then I came back and I was like, you know, I want a little something that, makes me feel good and warm and fuzzy inside. And I just wanted to kind of give back and pay it forward to my community.
I want to touch on one of the points there. So you mentioned you spent over a decade in Europe living abroad. And I
Two
think I've had
decades.
many,
Two
yeah,
decades.
2 decades really. And I've had plenty of conversations with CIOs in the public sector across the country. For the most part, it's a pretty local background of experience. So, kind of similar follow on to the first question, but with a more specific nuance to it. What do you think your European slash kind of global experience of living abroad brought to this role that may have been different than kind of someone that's spent most of his life, within Illinois or within the United States?
I would say the main thing for me is perspective. And I would say experience and looking at things differently. Government has a particular way of doing things. It's the status quo. You simply stay in that lane. When we start talking about driving innovation, right, and working overseas, especially in Budapest. I mean, Budapest is, it is the gem. It is the central. It is the financial hub of Eastern Europe. You know, up until 1989, when the wall fell,
Yeah.
they were under, you know, um, occupation. After that, when the Russians actually left, they had to reinvent themselves, everything. So I sat and watched in Budapest with the generations, the gig economy, the development of new ideas and technology, and they were just resilient, right? Taking nothing and making it something was just incredible to sit back and watch that. It was it was quite interesting because I even had the opportunity when I was working for Morgan Stanley to get my MBA from Central European University, bringing that perspective back and seeing some of the things that they had done there. Just say, hey, we can apply some of these things in Aurora. Right? We don't have to
Yeah.
reinvent the wheel. There's nothing new under the sun here.
So bringing that back to Aurora, one of the things that you've mentioned to me and spoke about is the STEM Academy program that you guys are heavily involved in, and I'm curious, if you could share a bit more about that, just for listeners on what that is. But I think more specifically, how do you see that as part of a community engagement relating to some of the approach you're looking at with AI and the education component, how the public sees AI and how the city's planning to use it? How do you build the relationship and education around that, and maybe how this program kind of leans into that as well?
Well, let me take a step back because, the whole Aurora STEM Academy for me was very personal. It happened during the height of COVID. I mean, the kids were at home from school, right? Parents were working remote. And in the disenfranchised communities, we had to provide services to them so they could be able to access the internet. You know, we take it for granted that, that internet access is there. Just like when you go home, you, you know, walk through the front door, you click on the light switch, the the light works, the electricity's there. Hey, I want to get a glass of water, hit the faucet. Hey, the water comes out. All right. You want to cook something, you hit the stove, the gas comes in. Internet service is a utility, just like gas, water, and electricity, right?
Yeah.
Well, if that's not a luxury, why is internet service a luxury? And that's the kind of mindset we took. And we identified like 11 different sites throughout the city of Aurora, which were in disenfranchised communities. And we provided them high speed internet access for free. And that was a public private partnership between the city of Aurora, a local partner who is a universal integrator called Scientel Solutions, and Online Aurora, which is our community internet service provider. So we set that up. We deployed that in less than 3 to 4 months, those 12 locations. And at
Wow.
that time, those kids in those neighborhoods could go there anytime during the day and basically have access to computer equipment with high speed internet. So after we got that set up, we took it one step further. We said, how can we provide them some after school programs and on the weekend around STEM training? Hey, I look at those kids and say, you know what? I can relate because I see myself in those kids. When I grew up, I didn't have access to any of that stuff.
Hmm.
So I said, how can we provide again through some type of public private partnership STEM training for these kids? Coding, artificial intelligence, CAD, engineering, software development, those services for free to the kids because those kids are the future entrepreneurs like yourselves and me and the leaders who's going to be basically running the city, running the state, and potentially even running this great nation of ours. So we basically set up the Aurora STEM Academy with a local training partner called APS Training Academy to deliver those. We started with a pilot, 40 kids, and the feedback was great. Then after that, in 2020, we said, you know what? Let's do this in 2021. And we started then. It was we shot for 400 throughout the city of Aurora. And again, those 400 had to be those kids who qualified,
Hmm.
average medium income and basically qualified for the school lunch program. And we overshot those numbers. And since then, 2020, now being 2025, we've the number that we've trained has been over, I think it's about 7,500 kids throughout the
Wow.
city of Aurora. And I think by the end of this year, we're on track to actually shoot over 10,000. And
That's
that program
phenomenal.
still goes strong today. So we're talking about training and preparing our youth for the future.
It's interesting because it's a fantastic program, and congrats on the success on it. I think a lot about access when we're talking about AI, and I think it's often overlooked because if you go and want to play around with Sora, which is OpenAI's video model generation model, or OpenAI's premium models, that's $20 a month.
But
That's an access barrier, right? That you start thinking about a tool. And now I'm not even talking about the education component where someone has to know how to
mhm.
interact with prompts. And so it's a really interesting question, I guess, as a follow on, and that is how do you make sure that as these technologies become embedded in everything that we do, that it doesn't become a dividing factor within our communities, right, based on income?
Well, that's a great question. And, you can't guarantee it. And it's already seen as something that is going to create another barrier, another divide, because it's really
Mm-hmm.
about who has access to it and who doesn't, the haves and the have nots. If and it becomes a social economic issue, right? Just like broadband, right? And just with everything that, we probably experience, throughout the decades when there's a new innovation that comes there. I think, personally, this is where government has to step in and basically look and say, what are the challenges we're facing? But more importantly, what are the outcomes we're looking to achieve, right? And if that outcome is education and access, right, for our constituents, you know, to be able to, have a certain quality of life, we as government, and I think we as government, we are the great conveners. We
Yeah.
are the ones who can bring the public and the private together, right? When the mayor speaks, people listen. When the governor speaks, people listen. When the president speaks, people listen. And at the local level, we have to be able to say, you know what, it's our responsibility. These are our constituents, they are the future. And we have to work with our private industry to make sure that those services are being delivered. And again, because I think government, just inherently, you know, we're a bureaucratic organization, so we move typically a lot slower than private sector. So as a CIO, I have to recognize that, hey, I'm going to move a little bit slower, but my model is to partner with the private industry so I can get the Darwin AIs and those guys to be my partner so you can execute on my behalf and we can deliver
Yeah.
service for our constituents.
It's a fresh approach, and I'll tell you, kind of that gets to my next question, which I'll share as a background as an entrepreneur that's built his second startup in the GovTech space. Um, with venture capitalists, often when you mention the G word, we call it the government word. Often it's seen as an industry you want to stay away from, very difficult, bureaucratic, all the things that you mentioned. One of the things I end up explaining is what you just kind of mentioned before, really, that there might be a big challenge, but the opportunity is massive, right? Both the market is massive, the need and the impact. But to that point of the bureaucracy, just to kind of uncover all the, not just talk about the opportunities, but really some of the big challenges here. How do you maneuver beyond even just the partnerships, coming from a private sector, wanting to move quickly, but then having all of that bureaucracy tie your hands behind your back? And especially when you're talking about technology, where if you miss a beat and you're running on a project and it's delayed by a few months because of procurement bureaucracy, that technology or model has already changed. So, how do you maneuver that challenge within Aurora and in general, in your perspective?
Wow, yeah, man, you really put me on the spot here. I mean, one of my monikers is execution is a chariot of genius, and I kind of live by that philosophy, right? And
I like it.
and the main thing is here, our vision here in the IT department is to be that strategic IT business partner for the city and the region and the state. Our mission is basically to deliver those innovative, smart solutions, right? Services that provide a world-class service, And one of our core values is to be nimble, right? And as part of my strategic approach and planning, we've created mechanisms where we can be nimble. That nimble is driven by partnerships in the private sector. Because I know that I won't be able to be as nimble as you will. So I've created mechanisms where I can partner with you so you can come in and, no pun intended, do a little bit of, that bidding for me to deliver that service. Because people are going to look at the results at the end of the day. If I'm delivering those results, right, people are going to be happy, right? As long as everything are within the guidance of the guidelines of the city policies and things of that nature. And here at the city of Aurora, I mean, we're a home rule organization. We have a strong mayor who's driving. He always said, I'm not just a mayor, I'm a CEO, and that's how we're going to run the city of Aurora. And also, when I came in, that was one of kind of the prerequisites. I said, I need to be at the table. If you want me to drive innovation and technology, I need to be at the table. I need to be able to
Hmm.
talk with the chief of staff and yourself directly. I don't want to get caught in the 3 or 4 layers of bureaucracy. I'm not a director of IT. I'm a CIO. So I focus on the business acumen of driving innovation and IT services, from cost efficiency and to innovation, and basically looking to say, not just how do I keep the lights on and keep the water running, I want to grow the business. I don't want to just. So that's kind of my aspect, and that's my philosophy, and that's my leadership style. And the mayor, the city council, and the chief of staff have been so gracious to kind of support me. And we've had hard conversations over the years, but I'm all about the execution.
So let's talk about some of the hard conversations. I'm curious about that. To go behind the scenes, everyone talks and obviously wants to glorify the success stories, examples of technology implementation that goes well. But I think actually some of the things we can learn the most from is where we kind of run into big hurdles or challenges.
Hmm.
So, what in your time, in your last few years as a kind of CIO at Aurora, you would say was a teaching moment for yourself or for others as well in terms of maybe an implementation gone wrong or some unforeseen challenge on the technology side?
Oh man, I got a lot of those. Where do you want me to start, right? Because I you actually learn anything unless you fail at least 2 or 3 times, right? They say third time's a charm, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you the most relevant one, right? You've heard about our broadband expansion project, the Internet for All. I started this project back in 2019, 2020.
Hmm.
I'm on the third iteration of the model. It's not about the technology with the fiber to the home. And let me give you some context. So the city of Aurora has its own broadband infrastructure. We have a middle mile with a 40-mile ring around the city, fiber optic. The city's 45 square miles, keep in mind. We sit in 4 counties. We
Yeah.
have 40-mile ring, and we have about 120 miles of laterals. And our community internet service provider uses the city excess capacity to deliver services to anchor institutions, schools, hospitals, and even some business, not for profit, but nothing major. There's probably 30 to 40 different businesses, no residential. One of the main projects that I'm working is how do I deliver internet services to the residents, and how can I expand the scope for businesses? If we're going to
Hmm.
be a world class city, a connected city, we need to be connected. Everybody needs to be connected because I mean, the economy is global. When we start talking about, you know, gig workers and things of that nature, we have to get everybody connected. The haves and the have-nots, the rich, the poor, you know, those with disabilities, the businesses, our residents, our visitors. Everybody needs to be connected. So with that project, we're looking to basically to extend our infrastructure with 700 miles of additional fiber optic and to pass 63,000 residential homes. This is a 6 to 7 year project that's scoped out now, and it's
Wow.
$150 million. So I've came across first time, I looked at private equity, that failed. The second time, I looked at bringing someone in to manage it. That's not what we want because we want to be able to control our own destiny. I don't want a major incumbent coming in and saying, "Give me your infrastructure, we'll build it out for you," and then there's nothing that's really coming back, you know, to the to the uh, to the constituents and the city, and then we don't have control, right? The third one is to use our community internet service provider to raise the capital to do it ourselves to amortize the cost over a 30, 35-year model and reduce prices for gig internet services to below $50 a month.
Hmm.
And it partnered with the city using it, but it's legally separate from the city. But then revenues that are generated will be pumped back into the city into infrastructure innovation projects that help the community. And that's the model where we're at today.
So you're saying it took a long process of iteration, really, to kind of get to this point.
To get to where we're at now. And I had to fail 2 or 3 times before that with the model to get where I
Yeah.
am. And today we're looking at taking that to city council here in Q1 or Q2 to get that approved to start that project off this year. And we're not dependent on federal funds. That's the beauty because right now everybody else is focused on BEAD, right?
Hmm.
Funding. Ours is we're going to raise our own capital. And we have a financier who said, yes, we will do that based on your model because we believe in this so much and we believe that that fiber optic is the future. And it is. And that connects to what? Artificial intelligence infrastructure. And that's
Yeah.
the basis of our conversation.
Well, so bringing back to that, I mean, I think one of the things that you've been hearing Sam Altman talk about a lot is, and we just heard the announcement of Stargate, the $500 billion investment in data centers specifically for AI, is the need for immense computing power. And there's a few things that rise in that I want to kind of jump in and talk on that. So, one is really take that for a second into the geopolitical international domain. Right now, there's, I think it was under the Biden administration, the chip ban that came into place from China, from Chinese chips. And so I'm curious, kind of as you navigate this and the opportunities that AI provides to the city, how do you think about managing the risks and some of the exposure that AI brings with it in terms of the capabilities of content generation, automation, bots, agent, kind of proliferation at a scale that really we haven't seen before?
Absolutely. And, we have to manage those risks carefully. People say, well, okay, yeah, that's easy. Easier said than done. But how do we do that? Right. I think you really have to minimize your scope and focus on those use cases that are high impact, but they have low risk. So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
um, public safety is an area that we're going to stay away from with regards to artificial intelligence at this point because we know inherently the data is biased. We know that, right? It targeted, disenfranchised, and certain minority groups. Right?
Yep.
Um, so we're going to focus on productivity use cases that might focus on how do we streamline a city's policy development? How do we streamline human resources activities, whether that's training and development, whether that's, just taking requests internally from the city or even external. We can focus on constituent self services like water billing, call centers, 311 to enhance access to those services. Or we might even look at using it in our city clerks for like records and things of that nature. So we're going to look on those activities where we start simple, we can show immediate gains, and we can focus on building skills and technology and basically reducing like failure impacts and demonstrating those quick wins. So that's what we want to focus on first. And
Yeah.
as we mature, because everything goes through a maturity life cycle, right? So we just have to be kind of pragmatic in terms of the scope.
So you talked about skills, and I think I've had the opportunity to partner with public sector for several years now, also with my previous startup. And one of the things I underappreciated when I first came in is the gap on the knowledge gap on the technology side that exists in some of the cities, not all, but it's generally a real issue. So when we talk about AI, a lot of this is brand new. Um, just today or yesterday, really, with DeepSeek coming out, the new model, R1 model, completely changed the market. And markets crashed today, saying that you don't need as much GPUs. But the point is not that. The point is it's so fast paced and changing. How do we think about educating our employees, your employees, and giving them the skills so that they can um, immerse themselves and utilize the existing tools that are out there?
Absolutely. I mean, that's another great question. And I think we need to basically conduct some surveys within, city government across our different departments and also community groups and also, I would say, our elected officials to understand what those needs are that are out there. Because most of the people, when you talk about generative AI stuff, they have no clue what that really means. Oh, Chat GPT. Oh yeah, I use that to write a speech for my daughter's wedding, right? And things of
Yeah,
that nature. We understand kind of how we can really leverage, this capability. But if you don't know how to do prompts or to use it specifically to look for the outcome you're trying to generate, it almost defeats the purpose, right? It's like I'm going
yeah,
to buy a Ferrari to cross the street.
yeah,
So
yeah.
why don't you use your two legs?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be one of the big focus areas because what some of the generative AI tools provide us is the ability to take a limited resources, which is the amount of people that a city can employ with limited budgets, and be able to do a lot more at the same amount of people, same amount of budget. And so,
Right.
a lot of that's going to come down to skill set and training. Um,
Absolutely.
let me shift gears for a second to finish off here and kind of look into the horizon for a second. So we talked a lot about today and AI and fast moving pace, but a lot of people are already fantasizing and imagining what AI where it will take us in 5-10 years from now. I'm curious how you see that vision within the city realm. So within Aurora, look 5-10 years from now, what's beyond the horizon that you see for the city, and maybe within that, what's something that maybe we're not thinking about that you think will have a outsized impact?
Well, great question. I think where it could take us if we could manage that roadmap, right, and also develop our strategy in a way that we're looking at kind of, outcome based, you know, um, objectives is I think we can develop what I like to call is like a cognitive government, where a lot of these services are just inherent, where you don't need, the necessary manpower to provide a 311 service, to pay your water bill, to do this. And I think that gets back, and there's a lot of fear with people in terms of, well, this artificial intelligence is going to
Mm-hmm.
replace me. Uh, I look at it from a perspective, it doesn't replace you if you build the skills. It basically will help elevate your job roles and have you reskill yourself and to do higher value things. Because if I'm going to, take a bill or something like that, those are very basic tasks. Right? And that's where I think we create efficiencies in government. And, with the political sphere the way it is today, government efficiency, that's a top priority in the current administration.
Yeah.
We have to
Yep.
really look at how we're doing business today, how we can become more efficient, and the whole AI infrastructure and these initiatives with broadband. And we haven't even talked about quantum computing because, again, with AI, there's a need for more and more power. We talk about data centers. People talk about data centers, but it's really the power consumption. I think we're going to hit a ceiling with a lot of these data centers in terms of the mass and the size to be able to, to kind of store and, house this compute power where we have to look at unconventional ways of, of, of compute power. And I think a lot of that's quantum. And I think you're going to see in the next 5 to 7 years a proliferation of quantum technologies because the quantum
Mm-hmm.
technology is there, but we have to start building applications that can be used on quantum platforms because it's going to change the way we do business completely. And I think it's
Yeah.
going to happen really quick. And I mean, you mentioned before the AI is already embedded in most of the things we do. When people talk about it and they're talking about, oh, it's going to replace my job, this, that, we've been using AI for the last decade or more. It's like, come on,
Yeah.
you just don't know it.
I think what happened that made it significant and why Gen AI is a buzzword now used everywhere, pretty much, and Yeah, it's ChatGPT, but really what's behind that is we used to talk about AI in terms of machine learning, deep learning, and then transformer models and regenerative AI came by. And
Hmm.
all it did, and I say all it did, it's very complex, and all the kudos to the people who built it. But what it did is it made AI accessible to the masses.
Yes.
So it was something that any person could interact and get value from, and
Hmm.
that was the genius of OpenAI and later on Gemini and all these platforms. And I think that's kind of what we're starting to see today is everyone engage with these tools.
Right. Agreed. Absolutely. Yeah. That accessibility, and with any life cycle, with any, life cycle, you get that point where you're trying to figure it out. You're trying to figure it out. How can I make that accessible for the masses? And then you hit that, you start going up that slope. And that's where
Yeah.
we're at. And that's where we're at. And now that's shut off. And now we have to figure, how do we support this? Where's the capacity? Where's the compute coming from? So I think all these things come together, and you know, you we have to look at it holistically in terms of the technology, but not just the technology. It's the people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Partners like yourself, it's the policies and the processes, how we're doing this to develop these different products, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
putting all that together, and you can't take just a tech. You got to take the people. How do we upskill people? How do we get people trained? How do we get the partners trained? What are the policies and the regulations in place?
So we'll be checking this recording 5 years from now, seeing
Yeah.
if quantum computing's here and if it's
I'll be saying I,
unlocked AI. Just tell me before which stocks I should invest now. So 5 years from now, we'll be in a good place.
hey, I'm going to ask you to tell me that information. So
All right. Well, on that, Michael, I want to thank you for joining me today, and it's a great conversation. So thank you for your time.
thank you.
That's it for this episode of the GovAI podcast. AI is reshaping governance in real time, and as we've seen, the path forward is filled with both promise and complexity. But conversations like this, open, challenging, forward-thinking, are how we shape a smarter, more responsible future. The GovAI podcast is produced by Poldu. Our editor is Maital, with production assistance from Shani Ra and Micheal. We'll be back in 2 weeks to tackle more challenges and explore creative solutions at the intersection of AI and the public sector. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and never forget that even the sharpest tools mean nothing without the hand that wields them.